Now we're going to look at how to create a system or think through a system you have in place with 7 key steps to create a system. So the 7 steps you can see here on the screen are to first create a stakeholder profile, survey your stakeholders, solidify your objective, define the measurable outcomes, or just outcome, consider various ideas, choose a plan and carry it out, and then reflect. So let's look at what these different pieces look like more specifically. In this video, we're going to use family engagement as our sample system that we're creating. So first we have our stakeholder profile. Your stakeholder profile means that you're going to define who your stakeholder is. So the stakeholders might be someone you know. For example, if you're thinking about what is our system for moving up in QRIS, the stakeholders might be you, your site coordinator, your staff, your supervisor, all these different pieces of who's going to be working on the system. In terms of family engagement, defining your stakeholder might be very different. You probably will have different stakeholder profiles, but you should really try to stay below 3 total so that it doesn't get you too confused. So an example, when you're creating these profiles, you want to envision a real person, not just a general population. So with family engagement, it's not just parents, but it might be a single mom who lives in Dorchester, works 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift, is very friendly with the staff, but isn't usually the person who picks up her child because she's frequently at work when the program closes down. With the QRIS example, that might be your assistant director, and you might be able to know them a little more specifically. So if you're creating a stakeholder profile, this example for the family engagement, you might think about 3 different types of parents. You might have a dad who doesn't speak English, and the children are well behaved, so you've never really had to communicate with them about important pieces. They, pay on time, they are aware of when the program's closing, and the dad says hello and goodbye to the staff every day, but doesn't really interact with them, but he does pick up the kids on time every day. Another parent might be the example that I mentioned earlier with the single mom who works at 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift. And then maybe another parent that you have in your program, or a group of parents, a mom and dad who always stop to talk with the staff. They come to every event, donate to the program, and they always find time for the program. So those are our 3 stakeholder profiles that we're thinking about. Next, you're going to survey the stakeholders. So you need to think about their needs from, you might think you know their needs from your program's point of view, but how do you know? So you really need to start asking them questions. And when you're thinking about surveying the stakeholders, think about whose buy-in is required. Thinking about getting their feedback and getting them to answer first if possible. And start with open-ended questions and then can go more focused depending on who you're talking to. So you're going to take time to survey the stakeholders about the system you're creating. With family engagement, that might mean asking parents that you feel comfortable with what kind of engagement they'd want from the program. Are they interested in family events or not? Do they say we're too busy for that? We're really not interested in family events. You can ask, how do they prefer to receive information about the program? Whether that's reminding them of spring breaks coming up, or asking them about family engagement, reminding them about events you might be having. And do they prefer to receive that information via phone call, text message, email? Do they want a flyer that you hand out in person? Do they want you to approach them in person? So thinking about those different pieces. So you might start by asking the parents you know really well, and then moving towards making a survey that you can send out to all families. So you're surveying your stakeholders to get a better understanding of what kind of family engagement they're interested in and would be willing to participate in. And when you're building these surveys, right, we can keep in mind the survey information from the beginning of this course, thinking about making good surveys and making it available to all people in the program. Next, you're going to create your objective. So your objective should always be SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And you can come up with ideas for how you'll meet your objective at this point, but don't rank them. Don't say, oh, we're going with this one. That comes a little bit later. But it can just be brainstorming time and thinking about, oh, maybe we should have a potluck dinner, or maybe we want to have an event where the parents come and get to play games that the kids normally play in the program, or do an art project, or do a literacy activity, whatever it might be. So think of your objective though. So the objective that I've come up with is I want to increase family involvement in the program by 25% in December 2016. Some of my ideas are that I'm going to have a monthly family night, I'll send out a weekly newsletter, or maybe I'll use Constant Contact to track emails and know when they're read or open, so I can measure if people are engaging with our emails. Then we're going to define a measurable outcome. So thinking about how are we going to measure our objective, and then remembering that this outcome needs to be concrete, able to be measured, and should be easy to measure. You don't want to get bogged down in collecting data unless it's needed. So some measurable examples could be that 50% of families will attend our family night, or thinking about whatever that number might be and what's realistic. You can even think about from the survey results. If you decide to go with a family night, if only 50% said they'd be interested, it will probably be a little lower than that realistically. Could also be the percentage of parents that open your email within 3 days of it being sent. So 75% of parents open the email within 3 days of being sent. So that's specific, concrete, and it's also measurable because we'd be using Constant Contact or MailChimp and being able to see what percentage opened our email. We'll test Constant Contact and use different lists, times, etc. with the end goal of 70% open rate. So that might look more at thinking about us sending it at different times of day, thinking about how we can get the highest number of opens and engagement with the families. Then the fifth piece is we're going to consider various ideas. So at this point, we've come up with a few ideas, and you're going to think about them in whatever context works best for you. I really like the impact effort matrix. The impact effort matrix is very simple to use because you can look at pieces in terms of what is their impact going to be. So it can be low or high. And on the other axis, what is the effort going to be from you? And is that going to be low or high? So if you have something that's high effort but low impact, and it's going to be in that bottom right-hand corner, probably not something that you want to do. If it's in that high impact, low effort, that's a quick win, and it's probably a great idea. High impact, high effort, strategy and planning will be required, but might be worth it and needs to be looked into a little bit more. And if it's low impact and low effort, it's probably going to be easy to do, but is it really useful? Probably not, but you can think about it. So as we're thinking about our different ideas that we've talked about for increasing family engagement, we've decided that the impact, which we all need to be on the same page of, is increases family engagement. And so some ideas that we talked about were hosting family night events for families with dinner. So will people attend those family night events? And we said this will be pretty high effort for us because we'll need to put into planning, we'll need to think about what activities will go on, and so that will be high effort, but it will probably be high impact because it will be people who are in the program, they're communicating with the teachers, and they're getting to spend time with all of the staff. You also might decide that your family event's going to be hosting parent orientation for all new families. So that will be pretty high effort, but will also probably be a little higher impact because you're going to be addressing real issues that are happening in the program. If we're thinking about the newsletter, you might see, that's pretty high impact, but we don't know if that many people will open it. So that's going to be, it's high effort because you got to spend time making it, but it might be pretty low impact because you know that many parents will open it. Some other ideas that you come up with maybe later are a suggestion box, which is low effort, but maybe low impact if people don't feel comfortable using it. And so some of these different ideas can help you get jump started about where do we want to go with this system, right? We have our objective that we want to increase family engagement by 25%. How are we going to do that? And so narrowing down that plan to decide what you want to do. So the next piece is choosing that plan and carrying it out. As you're doing this, you can use a variety of templates to plan, thinking about a strategic plan, an action plan. It just depends on what you're planning or what your system is. But you always need to consider who is going to do it, so who's in charge of it, what materials are needed, and keeping in mind what is that outcome. So within this system, we've decided that our family engagement is going to increase by 25% in December. And so that might mean we've already started measuring that. Maybe we haven't, just depends on the program. And this one we're going to say that we haven't started, but this is going to be our jumping off point. And we've come up with a few ideas. And so we've decided to go with the idea of a family, kind of combining two. We're going to do a family orientation night and a potluck. So that is our plan. So we're thinking about who's going to do it. The director, we've decided that the director and 3 parents are going to organize the written materials. The director, because they know which pieces need to be shared with parents. And then parents from last year commenting, saying, oh, this is something that I wish I'd known. This is something that I need a little more explanation about. And the parents are going to help organize who's going to bring what for the potluck. And so that's who we've decided is going to do it. Some resources that we need is we're going to need the parent handbook and copies with updated information. We'll need a sign-up sheet for the potluck, and we might need some notices home to remind parents that it's happening. We've decided that's going to happen September 20th, so that we're getting a couple, we have parents able to start the school year, but we're getting them pretty quickly. And our desired outcomes are that 75% of the parents will attend. We'll have enough food for everybody, and we'll get positive feedback. And so I'm going to put in the outcomes as if it's already happened. So once we run it, we've completed it, we're going to measure what we said, right? We had our desired outcomes, and so we're going to measure to see if we met those outcomes. So our outcomes were that only 70% of parents attended, but 30 children were represented. There was tons of food, people liked it, and they wanted to have another one, so that's great. But we did notice that we needed to have activities for the kids to do so they don't get bored. So we've measured those outcomes. We've said, did we have 75% of parents attend? Not quite, but we know how many we had attend. There was enough food for everybody, great. And we had positive feedback, but also some feedback for ways we could improve. So we chose a plan, we carried it out. And then we're going to reflect. Reflection's the last piece, because the system happens multiple times, so don't continue it if it isn't working. Find ways to change it up. It's important to reflect with appropriate stakeholders, so that can be surveying the families, asking people what they thought, measuring if your outcome happens, and think about, will there be incentives for completing the system, for completing the plan that was in place? What kind of short-term gratification can there be? And we're always keeping in mind continuous quality improvement with our reflection. How can we improve for next time? So with our family engagement, we measured the outcomes, and we did reflect with appropriate stakeholders. We asked for feedback of it, so that's great. We can also ask for feedback from staff to see if they think that it went well, if they feel like families understood what was going on. The incentives for completing are probably hoping that you don't need to talk with families that much about pieces that were explained there. And so reflecting on it, thinking back on it. And then we're going to go back to our goal of remembering that we wanted to increase family engagement by 25% by December. So we held this in September, and so we need to think, if we are having another family night, are we going to increase it by 25%? Are we changing our goal? What does that look like? And so remembering that this family engagement piece can have a lot of different pieces to it, right? Are we thinking about 25% family engagement in just the potluck? Or are we thinking 25% family engagement in our newsletters? And so suddenly we realize that we have quite a few different systems here. But it's important to have gone through it, thought about the different ideas, and worked through what will work best. So now that we've planned a family event, an orientation and potluck, are we going to continue using this system, or do we decide that we need to use another system? And so as you can see, systems are not something that's necessarily easy to create and have just in place, but you're doing this every day. You're having systems completed every single day, every single month within your program. And the purpose is to think about, how are we formatting these systems? Are we thinking through them, or are they happening just because they have to? And we've never sat down and thought through these different pieces. So as you're creating systems, as you're thinking about the systems that happen in your program every day, you want to think about these 7 pieces. Are we involving? Are we doing these 7 pieces? And if you have a system already in place and it's going pretty well, you might not need to go through every single piece very specifically. But I would encourage you to go back through and say, are we thinking about the right stakeholders? Are we keeping the stakeholders' needs in mind and their opinions in mind? Do we have a clear objective? And are we defining a measurable outcome and measuring that? And when we're done with this, with these systems that happen, are we reflecting? And that reflection might not happen every single time. It would be great if it did, but it might be a problem of you have a ton of new kids starting in September, and so you create a system in place to walk them through their first day. And you might at the end of the day reflect and say, oh, I'm going to change that a little bit. All right, that's fine. But you might not be able to measure the success, because maybe the success measurement is that the child is participating in an activity at all times, or 95% of the time, 4 days a week. So you might not be able to reflect right away if that measurable outcome happened. But building time into thinking about that system, thinking about that measurable outcome, and really reflecting on it, so then the next time it happens, you've maybe made a change, or you've solidified it to say, this is working, and so this is how our system is in place.